The Shoten calendar hails from the Armost region. It was an era that the previous generation remembered as a time of hardship. The land lay beneath the iron rule of the great King Amos, who had mercilessly stripped the lesser kingdoms of their power. It was an era when champions from every corner of the world converged, waging relentless battles for supremacy, never allowing the clash of might to fade. They moved with the untamed energy of wild beasts, sweeping through the chaos like a storm unleashed. These were days when anyone driven to protect someone would leap headlong into battle without a second thought. This was a trial they had to endure, a true test of their strength, demanding they stand firm and claim victory. And on that battlefield, a lone figure shone, a man known as Varian de Lioncourt, his presence impossible to ignore amidst the chaos. He radiated an even greater majesty than the illustrious ancestors who had first founded the Lion Corps kingdom. Once, he had been an ordinary man. Now, lost in contemplation, he finally set forth, gripping his sword with unwavering resolve. Nothing else mattered to him anymore. I plunged deeper and deeper into the boundless void until, all at once, he stood in the path of the wooden blade as a young man beside him collapsed, and a once lifeless stranger, suddenly revived, grabbed his shoulder, bewildered and struggling to comprehend the chaos around them. His eyes flew wide open as he looked around, suddenly realizing he had landed in a completely unfamiliar world, one so vastly different from everything he had ever known. And to his astonishment, he now inhabited the fragile body of a child. A man with a wooden blade strode forward, speaking hurried, unfamiliar words. The resurrected hero realized he couldn't understand the language, and before he could react, the blade flashed and darkness consumed him. His desperate cries faded into silence as darkness engulfed him. For 2 months since his rebirth, List fought relentlessly each day, pushing past his limits until exhaustion overwhelmed him, and he could no longer fight. In that moment, he grasped the true nature of the world. He trained alongside other spirited young men, each of them pushing their limits together. Another boy approached Varian, his eyes alight with spirited curiosity. He eagerly asked how Varian was doing and whether he had discovered anything new lately. This enthusiastic visitor was none other than his older brother, Robo. The reincarnated man quickly mastered combat in 2 months, thanks to Varian's lithe body. Meanwhile, Robo asked him to stop calling him elder brother and use a more casual address. Before anyone could invite Varian to breakfast, luck favored all. Despite his odd, changed behavior, he truly was a different person. He was met with kindness, as others simply assumed he had amnesia from a head injury. Though their status was noble, they served only simple fare: soup, bread, and cheese. None of it came close to the flavors he remembered from his own world. He pushed forward relentlessly, unfazed by matters of taste. As long as his stomach didn't protest, the flavor was of little concern to him. Even though it was a complete lie, the boy smiled and confessed that he genuinely enjoyed the simple pleasure of savoring his meal. The older brother was genuinely taken aback by her reaction. On the film set, he had unexpectedly begun to display a whole array of mannerisms, each one vividly stirring her emotions. He had changed, and for once, he wasn't afraid to admit it. He found himself drawn to the boy's new form, so much more than to the person he used to be. And it wasn't just him. Everyone around seemed to share the very same sentiment. Although the remark could be taken as a compliment, the transformed man found himself reflecting on just how mischievous he'd once been. He said it was time to greet their mother, prompting Varian to ask if their eldest brother would join them at church. Roble shook his head, saying their brother found it dull, so they'd meet him later instead. Not everyone present in the church listens attentively to the sermon. Varian listened closely, knowing this religious group held the most knowledge of the land. Indifferent to the sect, his curiosity drove him to absorb everything. His mother watched, amazed by how much he'd changed since losing his memories. When the sermon concluded, the priest approached Rusiano, Varian's mother. He asked how things were going with the boy, and she replied that at the very least, she was relieved he could hold a decent conversation. The priest sank to his knees before Varian and gently asked if he was interested in the teachings of Shotan. With unwavering determination, Varian affirmed his interest, reciting a passage he had memorized while listening intently to the sermons. His mother and the priest were both stunned by the boy's uncharacteristically strange behavior. The priest, his voice heavy with solemnity, insisted with unwavering resolve that people must remain steadfast in their faith. After all, this would have fostered a profound understanding between the child and their father, potentially averting unrest within society. He turned to the boy, asking if he understood all this at just 7. The boy, with the sharpness and maturity of someone 41, replied he did, and immediately began to explain the meaning of what had been written. The memory lingered vividly until the priest, unable to contain his excitement, finally shared the tale with his mother. Beloved by the gods, he discovered that his memory loss was, in fact, a true blessing bestowed from above. He had no inkling he had crossed a line. While the priest eagerly wished for the boy to join the temple, even his own mother harbored doubts about such a decision. At last, the young man broke his silence. He confessed that he had no desire to enter the monastery. There was something else weighing on his heart. But the dark-haired figure paused, promising to continue the tale tomorrow. He stood by his brother and his family, offering steadfast support through thick and thin. Reynal apologizes for his behavior, and as he does, Ryan can't help but notice the hint of satisfaction flickering across the boy's face. He's clearly enjoying this moment. His brother and the man he had once been both agreed. This twist of fate might finally set him on the right path. Every time he spoke of his boundless love for his brother, his mother's eyes would fill with tears, making Varian once again question just how harsh his other self had been in the past. Ryan also considered asking the boy if he'd like to study at the church, where shelves overflowed with books. For Varian, it would have been a splendid chance to explore a world beyond his own. Luciano nodded his agreement, and the boy instantly sensed it. Although the country had no formal schools, he still managed to immerse himself in literature and acquire a basic education through the opportunities provided by the church. Everyone returned home and gathered around the round table for dinner. Rudolph, taking on the role of the father, joined them, making the meal feel even more like a true family gathering. He inquired gently about the condition of his head, concern flickering in his eyes. The man was revealed as the one who struck the boy and started it all. Yet Varian calmly assured everyone he was fine. Though memories returned slowly, he'd already decided to study under Reynolds' guidance. Varian's mother shared with their father how deeply Reynolds admired their son's remarkable intellect, while Robel, brimming with enthusiasm, was eager to stand by his younger brother's side. The reincarnated man first thought his family didn't want his past self, but later saw her true talent was devouring every morsel. Now, he still longs for a taste from his old world, but that chance is gone forever. Rudolph chuckled as he watched his son devour his meal with unwavering enthusiasm. Robel, grinning, couldn't resist teasing that even without his memories, his appetite was as impressive as ever. The entire family burst into laughter together. As Varian sat among his loved ones, he realized that, despite his troubled past, he was still an inseparable part of the family's warm embrace. And so, Tanaka-sei left the world behind, yet his journey as a variant was only just beginning. After his death, he made a vow to give everything he had. This time, he would not live as Tanaka-sai, but as a true Varian. He was a man utterly convinced that he possessed. The Varian Alliance War began with a historic clash, as rival forces met with unwavering resolve. For the Alliance warriors, this was more than a battle. It marked the start of a campaign that would define their destiny. He intended to make them regret ever holding such a misguided belief. He would show them just how wrong they were, as if robbing them would be that easy, that they could easily trample over men. He reveled in the lively company of two spirited women, their laughter echoing around him and filling the air with joyful energy. A messenger burst in, announcing the battle had just begun. Rising urgently, he demanded answers, questioning what victories an army of 600 peasants without real leaders could possibly achieve. Jacinda wanted to emphasize that they had never imagined Lev Quard possessed such unwavering moral resolve. In fact, he was already preparing to soothe the Viscount until you intervened. He used a head with the top sliced off and remarked that such an answer utterly lacked brilliance. The severed fragment instantly declared, with unyielding resolve, that it would settle for nothing less than absolute victory. Hurling half of the severed head at one woman's feet, he commanded his men to collect the heads of every member of the Lion Corps and display them for all to see. As they drew closer to the capital, their goal was clear: to sow fear in the hearts of their enemies. At the mere thought of it, he would erupt into a manic laughter, insisting with ruthless urgency that his men eliminate every last member of Lion Corps without an ounce of mercy. Rhetoric found himself surrounded by enemies in a deadly ambush, yet he stood his ground, unwavering and resolute. Despite his overwhelming exhaustion, he bravely held the line within the capsule, standing firm against a relentless horde of enemies. I narrowly escaped a blow to the back when out of nowhere a savior appeared and in a flash sliced the villain clean in two. You're acting just like a real Yannick. Their knowing smiles say it all. There's no doubt it's really him. After the joke, they exchanged warm smiles, yet an unspoken tension still lingered between them. Their focus sharpened on the looming battle that awaited them just ahead. Once again, they braced themselves for battle, declaring with unwavering confidence that the true thrill still lies ahead. Rollo and Jean fought in sync, but as Jean muttered irritably about his dwindling arrows, Rollo chuckled and teased, "There are other weapons, you know. You'll see for yourself soon enough," grinning slyly. While most are taught that the sword excels in swift, piercing thrusts, this approach falters when faced with multiple opponents. Reckless, unchecked swinging can spell disaster for the one who wields it. Even a seasoned warrior would struggle to crush a rebellion as swiftly and skillfully as Salunantic. Likewise, when someone is surrounded, their chances of mounting a successful defense drop drastically. Forcing the enemy into close combat limits their movement and makes them cautious to avoid friendly fire. As their numbers fall, your attacks face less resistance, giving you more freedom to strike without obstruction. The variant blade collided with the shield of one of the bachelor's forces, but its strike failed to pierce the defensive barrier, resulting in... This technique involves relentlessly striking the shield, blow after blow, until it finally fractures, creating an opening for a decisive attack. The master of a blade, forged solely to sever an enemy's head in one swift strike, unleashed a mighty swing. Yet, in the very instant of impact, the sword succumbed to the force and shattered. At that very moment, another group of enemies surged in from behind. Without hesitation, Varian thrust his broken blade straight through his opponent's throat. Suddenly, he felt a sharp blow to his side and glanced down to see someone attempting to stab him with a dagger. Yet the weapon found no purchase. His armor absorbed the attack completely, rendering the strike utterly futile. He spun around with lightning speed, hurling the man to the ground so forcefully that his neck broke with a sickening crack. The opponent, caught completely off guard by the sudden assault, was left in utter shock. Varian found himself increasingly ensnared by the sinister aura that pressed in around him, its dark influence creeping ever deeper into his heart. Jean was left utterly stunned, struck by the unwavering resolve and courage radiating from this man. Varian seized a weapon from the fallen at his feet. Sweat dripped from his brow as he caught his breath. Then, gripping the blade tightly, he demanded, "Who's next?" Laura grew even more formidable, her voice ringing out as she dared those with a death wish to come and face her boldly. He would ruthlessly obliterate anyone who dared approach, carving a path through the ranks of his foes and single-handedly sweeping aside the full might of the Bachelor's forces. The moment Aryan appeared on the horizon, radiating a fierce determination to annihilate them all, an icy wave of fear swept through their ranks. Terror gripped them to the bone, and they began to tremble uncontrollably. Varian awakened his home, rousing it from a deep and restful slumber. His entire journey as a lion turned out to be nothing more than a fleeting dream. Moving at a snail's pace and groaning with every step, he made his way down the hallway toward the bathroom, his stomach racked with unbearable pain. Uncomfortable and restless, he wondered if a shower might lift his spirits and bring him some relief. As he lifted his head to glance into the mirror, he instantly found himself peering into another world. He himself. The shock of this startling revelation tore a gasp from the dark-haired man. Staggered, he collapsed to the ground, a sudden wave of realization crashing over him. An alternate version of him from another world approached his older self, asking, "Who are you, really?" The confused elder could only wonder in silence, half believing he was haunted by a ghost from his own past. They relentlessly bombard us with questions, never giving us a moment's rest. Time and again, in that familiar old way of his, he struggled to affirm his true self, almost uttering his own name as if the sound might anchor his identity. Suddenly, he realized he couldn't recall it at all. Was it truly him? Yet before I could be certain, reality had already closed in around us once more. With a swift swing of his lengthy club, he lopped off the head of one of his foes. The corpse crashed to the ground, leaving everyone stunned by the sheer, awe-inspiring power of this man. With relentless fury, the dark-haired warrior cut down foe after foe, his strength seemingly boundless. With effortless grace, he sent one enemy flying, hurling the unfortunate foe straight into a cluster of adversaries. With astonishing strength, he hurled his enemies aside in an instant, forcing them to crash helplessly to the ground. With a mighty swing of his weapon, he struck down his enemies, the blade slicing through them so fiercely that blood instantly splattered in every direction. Lost in thought, Varian pondered the reasons behind it all, searching for meaning in the events unfolding around him. People struck him as so helplessly fragile that he couldn't help but laugh at his overwhelming supremacy. He could scatter their armies with barely a thought, as if they were nothing more than game to be hunted. He burst into laughter, a surge of satisfaction coursing through him as he fiercely longed to witness the downfall of his enemies. They would dash around, their screams of terror filling the air, unwittingly amusing him with their cries of utter despair. Suddenly, a vivid memory of his brother Robert flashed through his mind, a warning not to become the kind of man who took pleasure in killing. Suddenly he froze in place for a brief moment, motionless as if time itself had stopped. Overwhelmed by anxiety, Rollo shouted out to him, for arrows were whistling dangerously close in his direction. In that tense instant, he realized just how narrowly he had escaped death. His adversaries lunged at him once more, certain they finally had the upper hand. But in a flash, he seized one attacker's wrist and delivered a crushing blow, stopping him cold. He narrowly escaped being skewered by the enemy's spear, the weapon thrust deep into the shadows of the cave. In a flash, Rollo surged forward, decisively taking down the advancing attacker and saving his companion from danger. He asked gently if Varian was all right, and without wasting words, Varian assured him that the armor had absorbed most of the blow. His wounds were shallow, and he felt fine. Roloff continued to chastise him harshly for his inaction on the battlefield, declaring such conduct utterly unacceptable. Jean chimed in, insisting he had no desire to be taken out in their very first battle. His comments struck a chord of fear among the others, as now reproach echoed from both sides. Rollo had one more message for Varian, a solemn reminder that the fate of every soldier from the Europodome of Lincourt rested upon his shoulders. He understood that becoming blinded by his own power was a dangerous folly. To indulge in excess would be the gravest mistake of all. They exchanged knowing smiles as Varian realized that, in the brief pause amid the chaos of battle, Rollo had managed to read his thoughts perfectly. Overjoyed to have his indispensable friend Rollo by his side, Jean opened fire at several enemies and, realizing that even after displaying his incredible power, the enemy would not surrender, he restrained himself and refused to let his emotions take control. Andre insisted Jean would have died 3 times without him. Though Jean tried to argue, he knew it was pointless. Despite everything, Varian, Rollo, Andre, and Jean had become a strong, well-balanced team, covering each other's flaws. As long as they stood united, the steadfast support of their comrades never wavered. They stood a real chance of claiming victory in this battle against their foes. Evstaki was struck by the unwavering confidence that radiated from Varian and his companions as they carried out their mission. Who could have imagined that their victory would come not by overwhelming force, but by enduring wave after wave of assaults from their relentless foes, true tormentors of the soul? He smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes, hinting that he still had a few surprises up his sleeve. Rollo turned to the dark-haired man, ordering him to deliver an urgent message. Their allies were under mounting pressure from an increasingly dangerous assault, displaying the unshakable confidence of a true commander. He wasted not a single moment on unnecessary gestures, immediately hurling his spear into the ranks of the enemy, except for one of his allies. The man followed close behind them, aware that the enemy was preparing to strike from the rear. He hurried toward another part of the battlefield, sensing that the enemy was already preparing their next move. He noticed something unusual on the horizon. Watching intently from afar, he thoughtfully pondered the scene unfolding before his eyes. The army he assembled was forged with a single purpose in mind, crafted precisely for defeat Rudolph and his loyal companion in a crushing battle. Watch as astonishment spreads across every face the moment hundreds of enemies begin to turn. He knew all too well that commanding his army of 1,400 men would push the limits of their endurance, turning the campaign into a true test of their resolve. The true ordeal was only just beginning, so at the final moment, people hurled themselves into battle. My strength, along with every other option, vanished in an instant, and one by one, I began to fall. Rollo, anxious, told the dark-haired man that bachelor armies had broken through their center. Varian doubted the scout's report, thinking it impossible for the enemy to have reinforced so quickly. He realized that from the very beginning, Eustace had held back a portion of his troops and reserves, cleverly ensuring he would overpower Varian's father when the decisive moment came. He cursed under his breath, suddenly realizing that they too had underestimated the enemy's strength. Rollo fought valiantly to hold back the fresh waves of attackers, desperately trying to warn Varian that they were hopelessly outnumbered, until his warning was abruptly cut off. Suddenly, one of the enemies hurled an axe straight at him. The powerful blow shattered both his helmet and his skull into countless pieces. Consumed by dread, gripped by fear, and teetering on the brink of death. Striding forward with unwavering resolve, he was determined to sweep his enemies off their feet. After examining Rollo, he insisted he was fine and only injured protecting someone, but the dark-haired man saw the wound was severe and deep, needing immediate medical attention. Yet others insisted that Varian should focus solely on himself. His thoughts spun in wild circles, offering no clues about what he ought to do next. Then, as if drawn by an unseen force, something inevitable began to unravel within him. Unfortunately, any chance to change the course of events had slipped away. The blaring sound of the horn announced Lion Quarrel's retreat. They fought fiercely for their lives, but in the end, they were forced into a gradual retreat. Still, their hard-won victories spared them from being pursued by the bachelored army. In the camp of the Lion Corps, soldiers either tended to their wounds or indulged in some well-earned rest. Yet Yanichin, everyone, brace yourselves for an ambush. Our enemy might strike when we least expect it. Rollo was swiftly bandaged and offered an earnest apology for his lack of usefulness. Varian, however, reassured him with a gentle smile, insisting there was no reason to be troubled by it. Yevhen arrived to tend to Varian's wounds, carefully extracting the arrows from his torso. Each removal drew sharp, involuntary groans of pain from Varian, the agony etched clearly on his face. The blond man snickered at Varian's antics, sparking laughter from others nearby. Their cheerful voices brought Varian relief. Even defeated, they still found the courage to keep fighting. The man whose life had once been saved by this very choice, suddenly, he bowed deeply before him, adamant in his resolve to become an unbreakable shield, vowing unwavering protection. Yet, according to another theory, sacrifices were unnecessary, for victory in this battle was believed to be inevitable. The others exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of what he meant, while Varian patiently explained that they themselves were the ones who needed to become. The plan was to lay an ambush for the bachelor's forces that very night, a strategy that left a deep impression on Roderick. He, too, found the idea absurd. This place was uncharted territory to them, yet Varian persisted, insisting the terrain wasn't so unfamiliar after all. Albert had once guided them through these lands before. Hughes watched in silence, his gaze steady and unreadable, while Yannick wondered if that involuntary gesture was, in fact, a hidden signal to strike at their enemy under the cover of darkness. Varian clarified his goal was to burn forests and villages, to cripple enemy forces temporarily, destroy their food supplies, and leave the opposition unable to sustain their campaign. Identify soldiers with a knack for trading, eliminating every obstacle that stands in the way of their ambitions. Burning the villages would cripple their economy, a fact the strategist knew, recognizing no one had used such ruthless tactics before. Yet Hughes firmly opposed it, disgusted by the sheer cowardice of these methods. Varian argued that battles can't be won by honor alone, but his half-brother angrily challenged him, asking if he was just afraid of the enemy. Varian immediately admitted that he was indeed afraid. He confessed that only the lives of his former brothers in arms from Lion Corps truly weighed on his mind. The fate of those stranded behind enemy lines left him utterly indifferent. Hugh shared the same sentiment, yet believed that fighting without dignity was nothing but a pointless waste. One opinion suggested that their people would never grasp why someone would willingly sacrifice themselves for the sake of their own pride. Another man had reportedly commanded his family to die with honor for their land when he left them behind. Yet Varian knew that Hugh was nothing like that. Surely, Hugh's only promise had been to protect his loved ones. Varian approached Roderick with a request. He needed 10 warriors for a special mission. In return, Varian promised that within just 2 days, he would return with irrefutable proof of their strength. I could tell that Hughes remained unconvinced, uncertainty still flickering in his eyes. Their decision was clear. They would abandon the path of honorable combat from this moment on. At midnight, they stealthily slipped out of the camp. Yet despite being burdened with the most unsavory tasks, their efforts were well rewarded, allowing them to amass as many resources as possible. Venturing deep into enemy territory, they embarked on a journey that swiftly transformed into a savage, blood-soaked onslaught. While they were at home, mysterious assailants broke in and brutally beheaded the man of the couple, plunging the woman into sheer terror. Overwhelmed by horror, she screamed, sobbed uncontrollably, and was swallowed by a wave of utter despair. Just before she, too, was about to be cut open, a child unexpectedly appeared, somehow connected to the car. Varian entered, confusion and fear churning inside him. The child's sudden appearance made him hesitate briefly, but he couldn't stop himself, and ultimately took the child's life. Furious with himself, he muttered curses under his breath. The moment he realized that memories of his former life had begun to obstruct his path forward, gripping him with the weight of a past he could no longer escape. Jen stepped inside, a torch in hand, and reassured him that there was no need for guilt. His actions had been entirely justified. Everything is engulfed in vivid flames, pulsing with radiant beams of light. He mercilessly snuffed out lives and razed everything in his path, all to satisfy his relentless need for certainty. Certain places grew deserted, and before long, Varian had uncovered every resource they held. Along with that, there was the plunder his men had seized during their daring raids. A warrior told Varian some villagers had escaped, but Varian stayed calm, assuring him that this was part of the plan. The fugitives would be the ones to carry vital information beyond the walls. With every successful raid, the spirit of their camp soared ever higher. He was certain that as long as their wishes were fulfilled, these people would remain loyal to him for life, a loyalty that would endure even once the battle had ended. Thanks to Varian's tireless efforts, especially his demoralizing blow to the enemy, the tide turned in their favor. Even Hughes, though reluctant, felt compelled to support Varian's bold proposal. Roderick was already enthralled, anticipation bubbling inside him as he eagerly awaited what would happen next. As Varian pointed out, the moment had come to strike before the enemy could recover. He realized, however, that this bold initiative unsettled his uncle. However, Yannick spoke up, confidently asserting that there could be no better time to launch their attack than now. His words swayed everyone, instilling a sense of urgency and resolve. Roderick felt compelled to agree after hearing these words. Still, Varian was simply grateful to have his uncle leading their forces. Though his skills on the battlefield were far from exceptional, there had always been values far more crucial than martial prowess alone. Their only option now was to melt silently into the shadows and retaliate in kind. Like a true devil reigning over his own domain, he soon caught word of Varian's maneuvers against their side in the battle. Count Vi abruptly rose to his feet, silencing the messenger with a sharp command and ordering an immediate deployment of troops for a counterattack. Suddenly, another figure entered the room. A messenger entered the tent to announce that one of their knights, rallying 100 of his comrades, was determined to devote himself to rebuilding the scorched villages, fully aware of all the hardships and consequences this task entailed. He declared all previous efforts futile, a wave of panic beginning to surge within him. Silence descended around him like a heavy shroud, and he paused, lost in thought, questioning what was truly unfolding. He couldn't believe that Rudolph's brother could be behind these events, let alone Rudolph himself. The whole scheme seemed far too crude, like the work of an amateur trying to pull off a cheap trick. Thus, he was left bewildered, unable to fathom who could have sown the seeds of ideas that would later unravel the unity among his subordinates. Meanwhile, Varian stood before his assembled warriors, commanding their attention as he addressed them. Roderick proposed Varian give the speech instead of the commander, surprising the dark-haired soldier. Roderick noted everyone wanted to hear Varian, whose heroism in the recent battle had already deeply impressed his comrades. Varian realized that turning back would only sow disappointment among his ranks. Determined to lift their spirits, he made a swift yet resolute decision. Without hesitation, he raised his voice and summoned everyone, insisting that each person pay careful attention. Instantly, everyone erupted in a chorus of voices, each one eagerly expressing their support. They claimed that their enemies were nothing more than pitiful creatures, utterly worthless, mere slabs of flesh to be devoured at will. He would guide them from the thrill of the hunt to a feast beyond their wildest imaginings. At last, the moment to strike had arrived. The thunderous roar of the lion corps echoed all around, fierce and commanding. Panic began to creep in, tightening its grip with every passing moment, though he clung stubbornly to the belief that victory was still within his grasp, even as his opponents relied on the most uninspired and predictable of tactics. The Count summoned his steed, preparing to lead his men into battle against Lioncourt. Yet, in a shocking twist, he turned against his own soldiers and slaughtered them himself. We bear complete responsibility for one another. He remembered Albert's words. A true commander must always leave a vanguard behind. Though the vanguard sometimes claimed victory alone by smashing enemy lines, their main duty was to strike relentlessly and destroy as many foes as possible before the enemy broke through their ranks. No matter what obstacles stood in his way, Varian refused to give up. The weight of his mission, to unite everyone for the coming battle, drove him onward with unwavering determination. After winning their first battle, the Bakelid soldiers became anxious in the second fight, hesitated to risk their lives, and retreated, clearly showing their reluctance and fear. This sudden ambush, fueled by the unyielding fighting spirit of the Lion Corps, would undoubtedly leave a powerful impression on the young scholars. The sight of these bloodthirsty warriors, utterly fearless in the face of death and recklessly charging through their own lines, struck pure terror into all who beheld them. The shouts of battle echoed without end, each voice vying to break free, until, in one of the variations, a single testimony emerged. The mighty man was still alive. Track him down and bring him to the ground. Use no weapons, only your skill and strength. The man lunged, desperate to halt his dark-haired adversary, but Varian twisted with all his might, shifting his stance just in time to narrowly dodge the deadly blade. The man complained about the slow pace and got ready to act, but the person Varian had saved distracted the foe, opening a gap. Rollo seized the moment, struck with his blade, and sealed their enemy's fate. Varian thanked them, ignoring Rollo's complaints about being ahead and potential dangers, insisting the situation was normal and they'd regret missing such an opportunity if they let it slip. Yannick agreed without hesitation and swiftly adapted to the new circumstances. He plunges into battle against a horde of foes, declaring that this is their one and only opportunity to strike, while the scholar soldiers remain gripped by panic and confusion. The older man turned to Varian, commanding him to look. There, in the distance, was a rider atop a horse. That was the man they'd been searching for. It was rumored to be Count Eustace himself, the enigmatic noble who almost never revealed his face to anyone. Panica admitted that once again he should have stayed hidden in the shelter. Yet, this very choice handed the enemy a perfect chance to spring an ambush. Yannick declared with unwavering confidence that he would clear the way, allowing their chosen strategy to surge forward and attempt to wipe out every trace of wastefulness. The men from the bachelor's quarters were mercilessly slaughtered on all sides, and soon the dread of an unknown fate gripped every heart. And so, they all reached the same conclusion. Escape was their only hope. Each of them could sense the looming danger closing in, leaving no room for hesitation. Their fear of death only fueled their determination, driving them to fight relentlessly until their final breath and seize victory over the forces of the Lion Corps. The blade variations shattered their defenses, piercing straight through one of the men. Then, the mighty roars of the Lion Corps thundered through the air. Her presence rippled across the entire battlefield, an invisible force felt by all. Seeing his warriors flee in terror, Eustace panicked and shouted at them for their cowardice, desperately trying to regain control. Frustrated, he even struck a soldier, hoping his blow would stop the others from running. The soldiers tried to apologize to the old man, explaining that their retreat had been unavoidable. But he cut them off, ordering them instead to advance with their spears drawn. He seemed to hesitate, uncertain if he should involve himself in such a risky endeavor. They dreaded the version that seemed to embody a true demon, mercilessly obliterating anything that dared cross its path. Varian and Yannick surged through the enemy ranks, their faces alight with exhilaration. They exchanged playful banter, teasing about whether either of them could ever catch up to the other. Hearing footsteps nearing, the bachelor's soldiers shouted urgently, calling for the police. "Guys, fear is starting to creep up on us." He used this tactic on every soldier to keep morale high, insisting their advantage was absolute, vowing to annihilate deserters and commanding strict obedience. Hold the line and crush the remaining enemy forces. Both sides of the battle clashed in a fierce and unyielding confrontation. One of the group members tried to persuade the enemy to retreat, sensing that their adversary had no intention of advancing any further. So Rollo suggested they take a different route, but Varian knew all too well that giving their enemy even a moment to think was as good as admitting defeat. But his thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a figure vaulting effortlessly over one of the shields, darting forward in a flash to deflect the blow of an axe. Fortunately, Varianic appeared just in time, swiftly cleaving the man in two before he could even dream of reaching Varian. The man went even further, mercilessly cutting down anyone who dared stand in Varian's way. Many loners faltered, sensing Varian wasn't alone in his fear. It wasn't just curiosity. Varian was truly impressed by Yannick's unwavering confidence as he boldly navigated through the crowd of men. "I realized this night had been forged in the flames of fierce battles." Nick commanded Varian to charge ahead and seize it at once. He crept closer to his prey, anticipating the moment when Yannick would join him. But suddenly, a sharp pain shot through the older man's body, halting him in his tracks. In that instant, a spear sliced through the air, so swift and unexpected, the enemy barely had time to realize what had happened. He had accomplished something spectacular, yet Yannick merely lifted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips, and asked, "Is that all?" Wasting no time, he instantly cleaved the man in two. He burst out laughing at the unexpected turn of events, while a Varian fretted over his wound. Yet Yannick pressed him to keep moving forward, urging him onward despite his worries. He gave them the freedom to choose their own path forward. Yanniktov.com. The dark-haired man, around whom the elders always strove to display their courage for the younger generation, spoke these very words. Varian dashed off, calling back over his shoulder that he would undoubtedly return to gather the bones of the elderly man. He carefully collected. Once more, he halted and fixed the bachelor with an intense gaze, as if peering straight into the depths of his very soul. With a fierce, unspoken command in their eyes, they silently demand, "Follow me, until nothing remains of me but bare bones." Sensing a rare opportunity, Varian and Rollo set out at once, eager to seize the moment. Rollo paused, questioning whether he had truly made the right choice. After all, his priorities had always revolved entirely around this path. His mission was to crush the enemy completely, as ruthlessly as if he were wielding a weapon unlike any other. He drew closer to the sixth account, curiosity quickening his steps. Not far from this very spot, the soldiers of the bachelor had come to a halt. Varian froze, utterly stunned by the sight of the dark-haired man. At your insistence, he remained perfectly motionless. With a terrified gaze, he watched helplessly as, one by one, his comrades were claimed by the cold grasp of death. Yet, that was never its intended course of action. Without pausing for even a heartbeat, he relentlessly tore through the enemy ranks, unstoppable in his advance. In one swift motion, he hurled the blade, his aim unerring as it sped straight for the enemy's head. But the horse threw itself into the path of the blow, taking the strike in his stead. Agony seized him as his lifeblood spilled helplessly onto the barren earth. He thrashed about in a frenzy until all at once he collapsed to the ground, drenched in the blood of the horse. However, his followers genuinely believed the blood was his own. Interpreting this act as a feeble attempt to sway their resolve, they immediately ordered a retreat. Each and every one of them was inevitably drawn into this perilous clash, becoming a participant in the dangerous conflict. They had claimed victory. With this triumph, it seemed as though liberation was now within arm's reach. Afterward, Lev Kvar's troops swept through the bachelor's lands, plundering everything in their path. Eventually, they returned home, leaving Varian with vivid memories of the fierce battle that had unfolded before his eyes. The operation finished the previous day. Once recovered, Varian and his team tended the wounded, Varian guiding Rollo and Tankari to steady a patient while a dark-haired man held his leg. A heartfelt "thank you" echoed in gratitude. While his companion hastily set about mending the broken bone, the man kept pressing on with his own task, undeterred. He wrapped bark and rope around the injured limb, assuring the man he'd soon recover. Tankari marveled at Varian's skill and thorough knowledge of healing techniques. Just before Jean entered, he wondered aloud if something was wrong with Varian. After all, Varian had only just woken up, yet he was already busy tending to everyone's injuries. Varian assured everyone that he harbored no hidden motives, then commanded that his requested items be brought to him. As a result, the others, especially Andre, found themselves growing weary from all the ongoing efforts. With practiced hands, the dark-haired man skillfully stitched up a deep wound, every movement precise, revealing the expertise of a true master at his craft. He found himself burdened with countless tasks for the benefit of others. After all, this world he now inhabited knew nothing of science. Even the very concept of bacteria was utterly foreign here. Jean and Rollo watched intently as he heated the needle, then carefully stitched the wound with precise, practiced hands. He instructed the man to carefully pull out the thread after a couple of weeks, even if it caused some pain. Grateful beyond words, everyone thanked him for his invaluable care. He found himself growing increasingly distant from those who called themselves doctors in this world. His mission was of a different nature, to bring mercy and comfort to those beyond the reach of healing. Perhaps he had grown accustomed to taking lives, but the loss of his comrades revealed a different, far deeper kind of pain. Even when his choices seemed justified, guilt gnawed relentlessly at his conscience, refusing to let him find peace. Once his duties were finished, Albert stepped inside. Varian, intrigued, immediately asked him about Yen. However, Albert revealed that Janek had passed away only shortly before Varian regained consciousness. The mood in the room plummeted, a heavy gloom settling over everyone present. One of them explained that for seasoned warriors of advanced age, there is no greater honor than to lay down one's life on the battlefield. Marion struggled to find the words to make Yudo, Yannick's son, understand. As Albert spent his final moments in Yannick's, he and his companions exchanged heartfelt conversation and genuine laughter, their warmth filling the air. Albert raised his glass, offering a toast to the mysteries of life beyond death. There was something Albert had been longing to ask Yannick, and he paused, wondering what Yannick truly thought of Varian's abilities. Without hesitation, Yannick replied, "He's the answer." Roderick provided the most precise and insightful account of Varian's prowess on the battlefield. Sensing that his words had been somewhat unclear, Albert leaned in, eager to hear Yannick's opinion. Did Varian truly possess the qualities that set him apart from everyone else? Others? Yannick's body quivered for a brief moment as he proclaimed with pride that he was a true genius of war strategy, boasting a brilliant mind that effortlessly drew people in, like moths to a flame. It turns out there's actually a chance for a certain option to become the king. Albert burst into laughter at his brother's words, then turned his attention to his meal, savoring every bite. A warm sense of camaraderie welled up within him, and he found himself agreeing. He wouldn't mind sharing another cup with this man. It wasn't until that moment that he realized what Annika had dropped. The shadow that softly veiled Albert's face made him hold his breath. Before he found the courage to share his dream, he lingered in silence for a fleeting moment. Whether Yannick was still listening or had already drifted away, it no longer mattered. Once Varian had entrusted the responsibilities of post-war reconstruction to his uncle, he made his way back home and declared. She wrapped her arms around the dark-haired man, drawing him into a warm, heartfelt embrace. He apologized for losing the sword and helmet she had so thoughtfully given him, but she didn't care about anything else. What mattered to Rusciano was that he was still alive. In that instant, a vivid memory from a past life flooded his mind. A motorcycle accident. And with startling clarity, he finally understood what it truly meant to be alive. His mother, he had sacrificed his own life so that she might live, and he was determined not to let Varian repeat his fate. News of their victory spread like wildfire, echoing through every corner with thrilling intensity.